Okay, in this video we're going to be in the Seal's Judgment, which is really the first part of the final 7-year period, and we're going to take a look at the judgments being poured out according to Revelation 6 verses 3 through 12. Also going to take a look at this Jewish temple being rebuilt. We brought it up in the last video that it's very likely that the peace treaty that the Antichrist creates with the Jewish people and probably at the level of like the United Nations with many people, um, very likely includes stipulation for the Jewish temple to be rebuilt. And so let's take a look at that and then take a look at the Revelation 6 seal judgments. Okay, so here we are in 2 Thessalonians 2 and verse 4. This is talking about the Antichrist, and it says, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. And in the prior video, we noted that halfway through this 7-year period, the Antichrist does sort of the final abomination. He enters the temple, as we see here, and he proclaims to be God. And we find in Revelation, in the middle chapters, that he sets up a statue of himself in that temple at this period of time, which is sort of the capstone of the offense against God, and it's called the abomination. So the presumption is, if Antichrist is going to do this and set that up at the midpoint of the 7-year period, the temple has to be there by then. And so we're just using logic now to back up and say somewhere in the first part of the tribulation period, the temple is being rebuilt somewhere in Jerusalem, likely on the Temple Mount. One more confirmation, and again we looked at this passage in the very introductory video to this series, but we'll take a quick look again in terms of the temple. And the he in this case is the Antichrist again, will make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall come to one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. And so again, we're talking about this halfway through point of the tribulation week. We can see that right here. And we see that it's an abomination according to God right here, and that the end of it is going to be wrath poured out on the Antichrist or the desolator. And again, it implies that if we have the sacrifice and offering occurring at the midpoint of the tribulation, of course, the temple exists at the midpoint of the tribulation period, or the 70th week of Daniel, as we've been calling it. Okay, so now let's start, and we're going to take a look at, begin looking at all the judgments being poured out, frequently called God's wrath being poured out. There is some debate, and I just want to be fair about the way that Bible prophecy theologians and students look at this. There's a little bit of a debate about the technical term of wrath and when exactly does it start. But I think after we've gone through the summary of these Revelation passages, I think there's a good case to say it really starts right here at the beginning, and we're going to see wrath being poured out starting in Revelation 6. All right, we're in Revelation 6, verses 3 through 12. English Standard Version is what we're starting with. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come," and out of another horse, bright red, its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come," and I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." When he opened the fourth seal, I heard a voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come," And I looked, and behold a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over the fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. And when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God, for the witness they had borne. They had cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on earth? Then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been killed. So the first thing we'll look as we outline this passage is that we've got four horses. Now the first one was in the prior video, and it was a white horse, and it had a rider with a bow that didn't have arrows. And we talked about that as being symbolic of the Antichrist coming at first to set up a peace agreement. And now we've got the second, third, and fourth horses coming, and they bring swords, they bring famines, they bring death and destruction. So let's just kind of take a look here quick. Horses back in biblical times were the powerful animals, and they were obviously used in battle and gave a huge advantage in battle. And so the horse itself represents power, represents conquering. We see different colors in here. We have bright red horses, we've got black horses, different color horses, and we get the definition basically of what the coloring means right alongside of them. So behold a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. And so what we have here is famine conditions, and the black horse is representing famine, and do not harm the oil and wine. And Bible scholars say that what this probably represents is a super class or a controlling class of people that are worried about the luxuries of life, oil and wine. Meanwhile, the entire rest of the earth is suffering under this severe famine type condition. So that's a black horse. And then down here we have the pale horse. And again, the definition there is given. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And so there isn't much mystery in terms of the objective of these four horses. You have the Antichrist, and you have the 3 riders with them that basically bring famine, death, pestilence, and they're going out throughout the earth. And in verse 9, we have something interesting here. When the 5th seal's opened, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God, for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, and they're basically asking God to avenge their death. Well, this is interesting. There's another passage that we're going to look at a little bit later, but these same witnesses are seen, and they've been beheaded for their witness. And so one of the things we'll look at coming up in a future video series is looking for evidence in the current day of what would be this beheading that would go on with so many people as to make up for this 5th seal. 2 more things to point out before we end this part of the study. We talked about the fact that there's a little bit of debate. When is God's wrath being poured out? And we can see here the Antichrist with the riders behind him going throughout the earth. And if you look, they're causing up to 1/4 of the earth just in one of these judgments, in one of these sets of judgments, I should say, with these horses, taking 1/4 of the earth and the people that live on the earth. And so sure seems like the wrath is being poured out. I don't know really how people defend the wrath not starting till later in the program. I know the word wrath is used a little bit later here in the text, but it sure seems like when you have a fourth of the world killed, that they're under wrath. There's also a parallel text, and there's some people that want to argue that what really happens here in the first set of seals is the Antichrist's wrath, and what happens in these later judgments is God's wrath. There might be some support for that. If you look in, we look in Zechariah 1 verses, I think it's 7 through 11, we see these same, well, we see 4 horses with the same coloring. And the context there certainly appears to be angels sent from the Lord on these horses, or spirits sent from the Lord on these horses to accomplish his wrath. So whether you see that as a parallel passage that's reflecting this judgment we're seeing here, or whether you see this as the Antichrist wrath being poured out and then God's wrath being poured out as modeled with the passages in Zechariah, I think it's fair and open to debate. The last verse we're going to look at here is 12, when he opened the 6th seal. I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, and full moon became like blood. This is again interesting. The 6th seal here brings about a huge earthquake, and then right after that the sun becomes black as sackcloth, and the full moon becomes like blood. And this might not mean all that much to the average Bible student, but there's actually quite a bit of focus in Old Testament times, in Judaism in particular, about concern about the sun, moon, and the stars. And we looked one of the prior videos, right in Genesis 1, God's saying he's using the sun, moon, stars as signs for the prophetic days and seasons. So I think we can't skip over this verse and just say it's interesting. There is such a thing as a blood red moon, and what it is when the earth sits between the sun and the moon, and the light coming off the sun refracts through the atmosphere of the earth. The moon, if it's full, is still very visible, but because the light has refracted and wrapped around the atmosphere of the earth, the blood looks reddish in color, and those are called blood moons. So a lot of people that take this signs in the sun, moon, and stars seriously look at passages like this and say, well, the sun becoming black might be a total solar eclipse, and the full moon becoming like blood is one of these blood moons. And so that they go looking, and there's tools you can go look and see from the position of Jerusalem, when have these blood moons occurred and when have the eclipses occurred. The tool is called stellarium, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but it sure seems like there's something in stellarium in 2014, 2015 that match up with some of this in terms of the blood moons and the solar eclipses. All right, you'll notice that there was no 7th seal in chapter 6 here, and really the way this works is the 7th seal is the unleashing of the next set of judgments, the trumpet judgments. So Revelation 6 ends with the 6th seal, and now we're going to proceed into the next set of judgments.